Health system investment arms, how they work.
Yesterday we did a panel on alternative capital. This is going to be an interesting discussion on where hospital system venture arms fall within that spectrum. But a very interesting, fun story to tell about this particular conference thus far is in the investment lounge upstairs, these hospital system investment arm managing directors and partners have been congregating around a table, and startups have just been coming up to them left and right, finding out what it really means to be a hospital system venture arm and how they actually make investments into the industry. So that's the discussion of this panel. And I want to start going down the row of having everyone introduce themselves with their name and the hospital system venture arm that they represent. And then we'll start talking about where you guys fall in the spectrum and how startups can get involved. So let's start with JD.
I didn't know I was going to have to go first.
Oh, yeah.
JD Friedland, I'm the managing director for Cleveland Clinic Ventures, which is the venture arm of Cleveland Clinic.
Good afternoon, everyone. David Sylvan, University Hospitals, also in Cleveland, Ohio, and I lead the venture capital platform for the system, and I'm System Chief Strategy Officer.
Good afternoon, all. Liridon Rushai. I'm with OSF Ventures in the Midwest, not in Cleveland, in Peoria, Illinois. I'm a director in venture investing with OSF.
Good afternoon, Anita Watkins, Managing Director of Rex Health Ventures. We're the corporate venture arm for UNC Healthcare in North Carolina.
Good afternoon, I'm Nir Goldenberg, and I'm leading the technology development function for Mayo Clinic Ventures.
So thank you for all the introductions. I want to start with just understanding what's the differentiator between hospital system venture arms and what most early stage or first time founders know, which are angel groups or high net worth individuals, and then they've heard this word of venture capital or institutional venture capital. And I have a lot of questions that hopefully we'll have time for, but what is the uniqueness of getting involved in hospital venture arms? We'll start with JD.
Again, I got to go first. Okay. So I think when we think about, and I think all my peers would maybe say something similar, when we think about what do we bring to the table as an investor, we certainly bring institutional level capital in terms of the size checks that we write and the degree of support that we provide to our portfolio companies. But we certainly think about ourselves as a strategic value-added investor. I think every investor says that, but I think we actually back it up in terms of having clinical expertise, in terms of having the ability to be a customer, to support clinical studies, and to otherwise promote and support the success for a venture stage company. Being able to have a clinical leader directly involved with the company in terms of being able to offer Cleveland Clinic as a customer and as a strategic partner to that company, we're really able to add a lot of value in terms of moving the pathway forward for a company. And the way we look at our capital is that's sort of the icing on the cake. If a company is coming to us because we have money, that's probably they're probably talking to us for the wrong reason. If they're coming to us because they see an opportunity for us to bring clinical leadership or other core capabilities of our organization, and then we can augment that relationship with the capital, then we're probably having a good conversation.
And David, I want you to expand on that from your personal point of view, but also add one layer onto it. What can they expect when they, meaning a startup company, reaches out to you? So you just talked about the added value and where does a hospital system fall on that spectrum of a potential investor, but you invest in more than just devices. The purpose behind these health system venture arms being created, why?
We certainly can't solve for all of our own problems, and in fact, many of the solutions that we look to aren't even sourced from healthcare per se. There are many industries that have already got to the point of perfecting a solution, and the glacial pace with which the business of healthcare, especially in the United States, moves implies that we've not always quite got to that point. We look to the double and sometimes triple, to borrow a phrase from JD, the double or triple bottom line. How can we solve for a well-defined, well-articulated, tight, unmet need? Perhaps also put ourselves in a position where there would be a yield from a financial investment, from a cash-on-cash perspective, but really stay laser-focused on the problem the job to be done. which toggle are we trying to impact? Length of stay or readmission rate or drug compliance, etc., as well as that notion of what does the back office of healthcare look like and how can we help to remedy the broken business model that is that we all reside in. So we really try to look at the opportunity from the perspective of can we perfect the product while in a live fire setting.
Can you expand on that, Lyra, from the OSF perspective?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Giovanni. Thank you. For us, it's absolutely kind of what JD and David said in terms of promoting innovation, promoting strategic value capture. We take an active board seat as a part of every investment that we make in terms of a board observer, voting board member, because we do see ourselves as that strategic value add. The biggest thing that we do up front is reach out to our doctors, nurses, therapists, operational leaders to see if there's positive feedback from them to move this forward and kind of do a deep dive discussion with the startup. Because if it's not an opportunity that we can bring into the OSF ecosystem, we won't invest. So it's not just about financial bets, but it's truly about kind of that strategic value capture that we can realize.
Anita?
I would add, in a lot of ways, we have such a leg up on most funds that advantages not only us as fund managers, but also really advantages the company. You're going to get some of the best feedback from our fund, pitching to our funds that you're going to get anywhere, because we can give you insight into hospital workflow that your traditional funds can't provide, what it takes to get a medical device through our system and approved, what if it's a rip and replace, what that looks like, what those contract terms are for the predicate device. There's a lot of insight we can provide that I believe that is unique to our type of fund.
There.
Yeah, just to second Anita, I totally agree with that. I think that inherently we are positioned in a unique position where we are both, we bring that clinical expertise, so we're both we're actively working around early stage development, but we're also deploying technologies into our hospitals and systems. That's a very unique positioning, and with that comes a very significant feedback and insights that is being shared with the industry, with partners. So that's part of the significant value that we bring to the table. I agree with that. Yeah.
And I want to, my goal of this panel is to also really shape what health system venture arms are in the ecosystem. And I want the audience to walk away with understanding really where they fall within that spectrum. So Anita, you and I were doing a podcast together a couple days ago, and we talked about this idea of hospital healthcare system venture arms popping up. I don't want to call them new, but there's some that have been around for a while. There's some that are fairly new. So Rex Health Ventures has been around for quite some time. Just jump into that. What sparked this? Why have we seen more hospital health venture arms pop up, and especially speaking from your tenured position at Rex Health?
So when we launched, we did it for 3 reasons, and those core values have held true for the 12 years of the fund. We wanted to help build a culture of innovation, and that's a symbiotic relationship. You have to have an innovative culture to support a fund to begin with, but you really build that culture of innovation by bringing the amazing companies we've seen these past couple of days into the health system to get folks thinking about ways to do things differently, how to improve patient care. The second reason was we wanted to diversify investment. We are a fund, we have to demonstrate a financial return, and one of the ebbs and flows you see in our industry of funds coming and going really are tied to whether they can demonstrate a financial return. And the third is to provide both our clinicians and our patients access to the most cutting-edge technology out there. And what better way to draw that to the University of North Carolina Health System than to have a fund that's going to draw those innovative companies to you seeking funding. So I believe those were our core values, and I believe they hold true for most health system funds. There has been certainly a growth since we launched of the funds, and I believe, David's also the chief strategy officer. I think it is a strategy of health systems to say, we've got to start doing things differently, we've got to think differently, and we really need the whole culture of the health system following along that innovative thinking and just different lens.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think all of those health systems here has a very rich history of innovation, and for Mayo, for example, there is a very long history of innovation. 1907, Dr. Plummer introduced the concept of integrated medical records. 1950, Dr. Hench, Dr. Kendall got a Nobel Prize for the isolation from cortisone, and so on and so forth. So we are relying on a very nice heritage and a very long history of innovation, but with that, I think that we also need to realize that we need to proactively invest in the future of healthcare. So that's and we need to be proactive around that. So that's where we are coming into the equation with our investments in order, again, to help participate and shape the future of healthcare.
I'll just add to that. It takes time as an innovation arm internally to kind of understand how you cooperate and work with startups, right? I think over time, our OSF innovation arm realizes that, right, things aren't going to be perfect. We show grace, absolutely. So long as kind of the feedback's heard and actioned upon, we're willing to continue to work with the startups. But it's also just embracing the innovation kind of culture, and then also just learning how to execute and kind of work through that in a startup atmosphere.
Let me add one thing. For the startups in the audience, I think you've all experienced how challenging it is to penetrate a healthcare system. And I think you're starting to see a proliferation of innovation platforms, some with funding mechanisms, some with not, because there is the need to create a front door, a templatized mechanism to be able to access the thought leaders, the SMEs, versus the sort of shotgun approach of attempting to find a clinical champion, to reach them directly on your own. We try to create that curated conduit, if you will, to the right individual within the organization to facilitate the conversations. And it also keeps the clinicians, the researchers, insulated from what could potentially be a barrage of unsolicited intake.
So we've talked to a lot of venture capitalists or even angel groups that make specific investments, and we're at a medical device or MedTech conference right now, and for simplicity's sake, that's regulated hardware or software. But for hospital system venture arms, you invest in much more than that. And there's a purpose behind what you invest in. So there's theses that these venture capitalists have, and sometimes they really do the hard stuff. You look at their portfolio and it's heart valves and neuromodulation implants and it's class 3, and you ask them if they do class 2s and they might say no for whatever reason. Others go super early. Others hang back commercial stage and they invest big checks. But you guys are solving a different problem when you make investments, and you're investing more towards a spectrum of solution and technologies. Why is that? And can each of you speak to that?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. A good chunk of our portfolio is populated with companies who are licensees of intellectual property that was actually started at Cleveland Clinic. So, when that IP resides in our portfolio, we already have kind of risk exposure to the commercial opportunity. And so we may be prepared to invest very early on because we see forming a company around the intellectual property is the best pathway to commercialization. So we may be a risk taker with respect to evaluating that opportunity and supporting that opportunity because we already have exposure to the IP itself, and we see this as the best commercial pathway. For opportunities which granted are a minority of our portfolio, but we'll look at opportunities to bring them to Cleveland Clinic, it probably looks a lot closer to traditional venture capital, where we really want to see a valuation inflection point that's been reached. We want to see clinical demonstration that there's something real here that we can invest in, and that our capital can really propel the company to the next valuation inflection point. And so, and that, like David said, and I think like others said, getting that clinical input at the right point in time, not only to have an informed opinion, but also to potentially elevate the conversation, because a world-leading clinician at Cleveland Clinic has evaluated it and believes it's worth supporting, really helps validate our thesis.
We have a lot more discretion than a standalone fund. When we think about our mission to heal, to teach, and discover, that's pretty much a catch-all for anything that might walk through the front door, so long as we can map that against a contemporary strategic imperative. Certainly the culture of entrepreneurism is critical. Certainly a return, a yield, a recognizable yield is important. And finally, supporting your own academic mission. So I think that's sort of sacrosanct for all of us. But we have far broader discretion than a traditional fund that might have a specific laser focus. It does tend to at times then create a bit of schizophrenia in terms of how we approach our opportunities. But on one particular day, we can be looking at a point-of-care tool. The next day, we could be looking at a piece of software to change the way in which we think about rev cycle. So we have this broad spectrum of opportunity because it's a broad swath of need.
Yep, no, at OSF, to echo what David's saying, we invest across medical devices, technical services, digital health opportunities. A lot of that's also just to keep up with the market trends and kind of what's happening in the ecosystem. We have a lot of clinicians who are clinician innovators, and as a part of kind of the value prop to them of working at OSF is having an opportunity to kind of look at these new devices, look at these new technologies. So we have a core group of physicians that we reach out to and get feedback from, and that's part of kind of what keeps them there as well. In other kind of clinical areas, we always look for ways to improve, right? Hospital margins are very tough these days, and where there are opportunities to kind of improve efficiencies and operations, we absolutely kind of look at them. There 500 revenue cycle coding automation opportunities, and trying to figure out like what the nuances are. I don't necessarily have the expertise, but I have a team of kind of folks who give us the time who help vet in that process.
So one of the focus areas, we invest across the entire healthcare spectrum, but the key for us is value creation, and specifically, can we be strategic to the company, and can they be strategic to us? For those of you I've already met with and talked to your company, that is key. It is, we do not want to invest in a company that we can't add value to you. Through that partnership, through the investment, and vice versa, you're not adding value to our health system and our overall patient outcomes. So while we invest across the entire healthcare spectrum, to your point about discretion, we're our own LP. We don't have anybody pressuring us to put money to work. So we are extraordinarily, I'd say, picky about who we partner with, and you should be as well. You should want to work with the health system funds. We collaborate a lot. Ideally, you have a couple of us on your cap table because each of us bring a unique set of skills and talents to the table. But it is an opportunistic environment where we take all comers, we look at them, and then we only end up doing about 3 to 4 new investments each year, depending on the market.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think that as healthcare providers, our mission is to provide the best care for our patients. And inherently, the care that we're providing is across the whole spectrum of different technological segments. And our investment strategy should resonate with that mission, with that vision. So I think that's why inherently we are investing in different technological domains in order to kind of continue with providing and improving care delivery, but also, again, matching our investment strategy with that. So that these two things goes tandem for me.
And I want to open this up to the whole panel, but for clarity and definition's sake as well, you think of corporate venture capital, and they often invest, or they do invest off their balance sheets. But I remember the OSF press release that came out a year-ish ago that it was a $100 million fund. Do you guys invest off the balance sheets, and are they evergreen, or are there dedicated funds that you're limited to? Like, what is the scope around these funds within these hospital system venture arms? Any of them can take it.
In other words, can the companies count on us to continue to fund them?
Yes.
I mean, since you mentioned OSF, I'm happy to take the first pass at it. So we have a dedicated fund structure, JD, and actually we're just talking about this versus kind of an evergreen model. You know, the approach that we took was kind of having that dedicated fund model for what Anita's kind of mentioning, having to be able to reserve for follow-on investments. Also just communicating out to the market, hey, this is what we've got. This is kind of what our focus is, so people know that we can continue to support and what that dry powder looks like. Because you know, one of the questions that we often get is, you know, where are you in that deployment cycle? So it's worked well for us. Not to say there's one right model; it just depends on what the requirements are for your health system.
And just from the Cleveland Clinic perspective, we are investing directly off our balance sheet. So, you know, I guess there's always a question of like, are we going to continue to invest at the same level that we have invested over the last few years? But I think the way we look at it when we make our initial investment, we have kind of a long-term capital plan for each of those companies. And so when we think about making a $2 million initial investment in a company, we have kind of mapped out over the next 5 years what we expect the company to need next year and the following year and the year after that. What I like to say when people talk about corporate venture capital, and I think it's true for all of us up here, most corporate venture capital investors make a small investment in a company with a goal to eventually acquire that business and acquire the balance they don't already own. Particularly for the companies that we start where we're at 100% of the ownership, we want to eventually get to zero because we want to see those companies achieve financial success either through an IPO or through a sale to a strategic, and we want to be able to monetize our investment, but along the way we want to be able to add that strategic value. So we typically, as part of our capital budgeting plan, we have a long-term capital budget for each of our companies and have a beautiful waterfall schedule in Excel that shows me exactly how much we expect to invest in our portfolio in 24 and 25 and 26 and so on.
Nir?
Yeah, so typically, you know, we would invest early, I would say. So typically we would invest, I would say, generally speaking, pre-Series C. So starting from very early all the way to that point. But we do continue and work closely with our portfolio companies in order to, again, make sure that they continue to grow, and there are different ways in which we can contribute and continue to contribute to the company with different assets and resources in order to make sure that they continue with their journey all the way to the point where there is a product and the product gets to patients at the end. So that's how we approach things.
We're also an evergreen fund. We have had a lot of support from our health systems, so they've continued to both give us allocations and allow us to reinvest our proceeds. We tend to invest around commercialization, so I love when I see Mayo on the cap table because I know they've de-risked it quite a bit, and it makes it that much more investable. But we're also an evergreen.
We're a hybridized approach. We are co-GPs in a pre-seed seed fund, so that has a very traditional fund construct, deployment, time horizon, etc. But the majority of what we do is evergreen off balance sheet there's always a set aside for follow-on. And then we have a third leg. We are in a position to act at the behest of certain very high net worth foundations, funds, or family offices who have a very distinct focus. Sports health or orthopedics, for example, will act as the tip of the spear to do the opportunity sourcing, the de-risking, the due diligence, and then there's a carry and share component to that. In some cases, there's a mission-related component to that. So depending on what the need is from the early stage company's perspective, we can find a home for that potentially when it comes to investment.
So going back to the spectrum, sometimes we hear venture capital, which is usually a 10-year fund. And they have timelines, they have to return capital back to their LPs. We've just learned that there's a lot of evergreen funds happening on this panel right now. What does that do for the partnership when you invest into a company in terms of not having that timeline pressure to return capital? And what can you add? I don't want to say more than venture, they bring a certain aspect to it, but how can you complement a company without giving that timeline pressure of having to return capital?
I think the biggest, the cash that we bring to the opportunity is invariably secondary. I think it's the access to the expertise to help the product evolve, develop, and sometimes pivot in a patient manner, I think is the discretion that we have versus traditional funds. And candidly, it's that strategic component that makes us, in some cases, more attractive than a traditional fund. And of course, you have to create a syndicate. But if more than one of us is involved in the same opportunity, I think you've got that incredible multiplier potential impact for the company.
So I completely agree with David. We bring that strategic value, but we also, at the end of the day, we are funds. We don't have 10-year horizons, but when I have an exit, that means I get to put that money to work again in another company. So while we're not pressuring the companies to exit by a particular time so we can return the capital to our LPs, we do help very strategically the companies grow and scale. There's about 35 of us that meet, health system funds that meet on a monthly basis. We're constantly pitching our companies to one another so they can get that contract with more health systems. They can get to those inflection points where they can be attractive to a strategic. So while we bring all the clinical expertise and the inside know-how, we also are working closely with our companies. We, like you, sit on the boards of most of our companies to help them grow and scale as quickly as possible.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think that we bring value around, both the commercial, technological, and clinical aspects, into our portfolio companies. So kind of all the three required aspects which are so crucial for startup companies and for sure for our investment. So it's for us, it's that value that we would like to push or provide to our portfolio in order to, as you mentioned, Anita, to make sure that our portfolio companies are succeeding, getting to those inflection points, generating more value, and at the end, concluding the development process and deploying their products into the healthcare system. So, yeah.
I think the only thing I would add to that is, right, not having that time pressure. I don't have to do a deal, right? So on average, we'll do 4 deals a year. And this year, we've done one kind of to date. So it's, given market conditions, just different level of new deal activity, very focused on supporting our existing portfolios, companies. So getting them through this kind of lack of market activity, market traction. When the time is right and kind of we feel valuations are appropriate and kind of market activity picks back up, we'll be ready to do, maybe 6 or 7, who knows. But having that dry powder and kind of that non-time pressure is definitely a benefit for us.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point, Laird, and I want to build on that because as hospital systems who are acting as venture capitalists, we don't have the luxury of switching to tech or whatever the flavor of the month is, like some of our venture capital brethren. We're in this sector for the long haul, and we're investing to support our own systems and to support the healthcare system as a whole. So for better or for worse, we're sort of stuck with the sectors that we invest in, but it also allows us to take a longer view with respect to investments in our companies. And as from Cleveland Clinic's perspective, as long as the thesis remains intact, we will continue to invest because we don't have to worry about returning capital to our LP because we don't have an LP. We're a single-sourced investor, and particularly on the PMA pathway medical device opportunities and the biopharma opportunities, 10 years sometimes doesn't work. And so you sometimes, particularly as an early stage investor, you need to have the staying power to support those companies and to maintain a meaningful stake in those companies through to completion. And the various structures that you've heard today allow us to maintain that flexibility.
Can I just add one point there? So we've had 2 companies fail over the 12 years of investing. Those 2 companies, the common denominator was that the institutional funds had invested, the traditional funds had invested from a fund 2 funds ago, 3 funds ago, and they had essentially written the company off. So we were the only ones left sitting at the table continuing to support those companies and help them get across the finish line, whereas the other investors had basically disappeared.
Yeah, I would kind of emphasize that point, especially these days. So one of the first questions we ask about a lead investor is, what's your dry powder? Where are you in the deployment cycle? Do you help follow on? are there kind of SPVs if you are kind of nearing the end of your fund that you set up, or kind of what's that look like to continue to support these companies? Sometimes it's not a matter of kind of the company, it's not going to be successful. It's just a matter of, they need to figure out a couple more kind of things, and they need to continue to be supported by existing investors to get through that hump.
Couple crucial points left on this panel. There's this topic or notion of inside out and outside in, and I want to keep on defining the various types of hospital health venture arms that we have on the panel. And from my understanding, and JD, you alluded to it earlier, that you work a lot with the technology that's developed at the Cleveland Clinic Institute. So that's that inside out approach, developing these companies and then hopefully nurturing them and letting them grow outward. Versus, and I know, David, we've talked about this a bunch, where this outside in, where you could actually kind of look and feel like a traditional institutional fund, where you are looking for outside opportunities that you can invest in. And then you also have this hybrid model where you do a bit of both. So I just want to go down the line and define how your hospital system venture arm actually exists or works.
Yeah, so we are absolutely inside out oriented. The majority of the companies in our portfolio are licensees of Cleveland Clinic IP, and that can be patents and it can be other things as well. It can be know-how, it can be a clinician or a researcher who is materially involved in the business. But it kind of comes down to one of the core principles of how we invest and why we invest, is that we need to have the internal clinical or research champion to support the company. So if you're a venture stage company and you're looking to Cleveland Clinic as a potential investor, I would strongly encourage you, if you haven't already, to find a clinical or research leader in the field of expertise that you're focusing on and try to get their attention. And we can, as David mentioned, we can also be a front door to getting access to those people. And if they're willing to champion and support the opportunity, then it is something that we can consider potentially as an outside in. But like I said, it's a much tougher road to get to yes at Cleveland Clinic Ventures if you're an outside in opportunity.
So we have that dual focus. We are a large research institution, so we certainly support our the potential commercialization, monetization of our own intellectual property. It's a tough road because you're literally going from back of an envelope or bench to potentially bedside, and that's a long road. So we do a lot of work on the de-risking, and we do a lot of work on the modeling of that potential pathway, including all of the regulatory needs. The quicker pathway in is for us the outside in. We look at about 400 or so companies a year. We do a proof of concept or a pilot or a clinical trial with 8 or 10 of those a year, and we maybe invest in 4 to 6, 4 to 7. We did 7, probably 7 this year, including a couple of follow-ons. The element I would stress for any early stage company looking to sell into a healthcare system is understand you don't have a singular audience. You have to be able to delineate in your pitch materials and in the articulation of your offering an understanding of the difference between who buys, who benefits, who pays, and who uses. Those are 4 different audiences within healthcare, which is what makes selling into a provider platform so challenging. You've got to at least have an articulation of 3 of the 4. You can solve for the 4th. But if you can't get to beyond 2 of those 4, you really need to rethink how it is that you're going to present and how it is that you're going to propose.
So at OSF, so we're very much more focused from an OSF Ventures perspective outside in, looking to make the direct investments in new technologies, new opportunities that excite our clinicians and operational leaders, depending on what the pain point being solved is. We do have some inside out in terms of kind of innovations that have started within OSF. We launched a seed fund exclusively focused on IP coming out of OSF, so that's very internally focused. But from an OSF Ventures perspective, we do focus on the outside in.
We have a very similar model. We have a fund that helps with proof of concept and helps with those really early stage ideas. But the venture fund, we're almost exclusively outside in. And frankly, I like that model because you don't have to tell the chair of cardiology that their baby's ugly. That you don't have that political pressure to invest in a company because it's a particular physician within the health system. So I like our setup.
Yeah, for Mayo Clinic, we are focusing on both, so inside out and outside in. So for the inside out, that's the bread and butter, of course, of creating IP assets and licensing those into our industry collaborators. For the outside in, of course, investments. But in addition to that, I would add that we are also focused quite a lot on co-development with industry. So we invite companies to, as JD mentioned, to identify that clinical stakeholder, that expert that could provide value to the company, and that would be a great starting point for, in order for us to explore potential co-development, which is another form or structure for outside-in collaboration.
So Nir, you just brought up a great point. JD, you brought up the word champion earlier, and then Anita, you and I talked about this yesterday or a couple days ago. This idea that yes, you're making investments, but there's clinicians within your hospital health systems that are really driving the decisions. They're the ones that are saying, I like this. And specifically, yes, while we can send deal flow to you to look at these external outside-in approach technologies, we can make introductions here for some of the startups, but if there's a physician where maybe a startup gets in contact with that physician, or that physician already happens to know about this company and brings you that technology, that's like the ideal setup for a hospital system venture arm to make that investment when they have an internal champion. And if anyone can elaborate on that concept so that we can make it super clear for all those startups that are probably salivating on sending you their slide deck after this panel, what does that really mean, and how can they get interacting with these physicians to help that championing?
Yeah, so I think there's at least 2 or 3 ways you can either find that champion and the role the champion plays. So, if you have a clinical study that's coming up, Cleveland Clinic absolutely engages in externally funded clinical studies. Our clinicians and researchers love being PIs for technologies they're excited about. So if you're looking for a clinical site, our folks would love to talk to you. And if you can sell them on why them being involved in the study is going to be of intellectual, academic, and clinical interest, that makes my job a lot easier, because then I already have an embedded champion who is bought into the solution in terms of how it's going to change the way they practice medicine. And then kind of thinking along that curve, if we can be a pilot site or a commercial site, that's always a positive as well. If we're already a customer, that helps a lot as well. But what I tell a lot of entrepreneurs is, I said, look, if the true reasons you're coming to me is, I have money and you need it, or we might be a customer and you want us to be a customer, and that's the beginning and the end of the conversation, it's probably going to be a very short conversation. It has to be part of a holistic relationship that develops between our institution and the company.
We're not mandated to make financial-only investments. I've loved a ton of things I've seen over the last few years that have never seen the light of day from our system's perspective, because I couldn't garner the interest, the attention, and the traction from an internal champion. So our team's level of excitement is just an initial threshold. That traction internally is critical for us to move forward.
No, I would agree with JD and David on both points. We don't require a customer contract in place to invest. We just require some line of sight to potential partnership, piloting, clinical kind of feedback input. So it does require that positive feedback from our clinicians. The biggest thing also is to know, we never push anything. It's always a pull from the business, from the hospital leadership. So, sometimes people get that confused. There's no conflict of interest. It's a pull from the business. If they say no, we won't move forward.
We can, to David's point, if I can see the most investable company that, everything on the financial side looks great, but if my clinicians or my executives don't respond with enthusiasm, not just a, hey, that's kind of interesting. It's got to be an enthusiastic response. I want to work with this company. This is a game changer. They're solving something where there is white space right now. That's when we invest. So hence why we only end up doing about 4 deals, and we look at 500, 600, 700 companies a year.
So I mentioned that before, but I think that as part of the due diligence process, we need to make sure that the 3 pillars, again, the technological, commercial, and clinical pillars are kind of aligned. And I think that we here on the stage represent typically, the commercial and technological side of things. And just to remind our dear industry collaborators, we always need that clinical pillar as part of the due diligence. We need that handshake there. As was mentioned here, you could identify your champions, clinical champions, on your own during, just week-to-week, day-to-day interactions, or you could also approach us and we can help with identifying the right clinical stakeholder that could initiate at least the discussion with the company. And by that initiate the required appropriate due diligence process.
My last and final, real quickly, I know that we're physically based in Malta as we all are talking right now, but physically you all are living in the United States, and this is a United States hospital venture arm panel. But do you make international investments? And I know that I dragged a couple European startups your way towards the table yesterday, but I just want to make it super clear as we're physically in Malta right now. Do you guys invest outside of the borders?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, as long as there's a U.S. presence.
Yes, to Anita's point.
It's not a limiting factor for us.
Please give our panelists a round of applause. This is U.S. Hospital Venture Arms here in Malta. Thank you.